But how are politicians looking at gambling? What is the view from The Hague, where our parliament is based? We do know that the current government is preparing to amend the Remote Gambling Act. The how and when are, however, less clear. Fortunately, our next speaker can tell us a bit more about what we can expect from a long-term policy perspective. I would like to welcome to the stage Robin Bleichrodt, who is Managing Director Public Affairs at FGS Global in The Hague. Robin, it's nice to see you again.
Thank you, Willem. What to expect from the Dutch government? So I have called around a bit for you guys in this political environment to see, hey, what is happening? But I see a lot of familiar phrases, but also a lot of unfamiliar phrases. So I thought, let's talk about me. I have met my wife 20 years ago, approximately, in Holland Casino Venlo. And 12 years later, where this picture was taken, I asked her to marry me in the midst of Holland Casino Venlo. And why am I telling this? One, because in a bit I'm going to show a marriage picture, which is what you do after you get married. But secondly, is because part of the story is the love of the game has been forgotten. And the love and the fun of being in a casino, and that it can bring moments of joy, which politicians also see is being forgotten. And for those of you who are wondering, did my gamble here pay off? Yes, she said yes. So that's something I'm very proud about. But then, where you might know me from, because I've been in public affairs for a long time, and I've been in this sector for a long time. I heard people talking about geo-blocking, and I'm sorry to say that once, when I was working for PokerStars, I prevented with an internet coalition the implementation of geo-blocking with the coalition of D66. And only to show that there are possibilities to influence policy, which is very important, to keep the hopes up that it could be happening. I was at the birth, with a lot of persons here available, at the birth of VNO-OK. I was at the less successful self-regulation of online gaming commercials and marketing. And the thing you might have known me for the most, together with Holland Casino, which I worked for a very long time, is that we put illegal parties on black 2 weeks before the market went open. And now I have been working for 1.5 years for FGS Global, leading stakeholder strategy firm in the world, 1,800 professionals worldwide, and we advise transatlantic companies, also in the gaming market, but also in other sectors. And I've been away from this sector, and that was very revealing, because what have I learned being more distant to this sector? Because I've learned a lot, actually. Gambling is not the talk of the town. I knew that, but I didn't know it was that much. Because people in The Hague are talking about winning, the future of our economy, asylum, energy congestion, digital sovereignty, business climate, housing, tech, box 3, social security, strategic autonomy, but not about gambling. Because gambling is a fringe discussion, a very, very, very fringe discussion in The Hague. And most importantly, people are talking, will there be a budget with a minority government? And that's what is very important for the gambling market, actually. Because this room wants a decrease in gambling taxation. But why would someone, State Secretary of Finance, put in the skin in the game when he needs to find a coalition over the left or over the right to lower that taxation? That's the question we're here to answer. And when we see Mirjam Bikker and Ms. Beckerman with their proposals lined up for this month's debate, does gambling really matter for these challenges? No, it doesn't. And to go back to my marriage, what I see once and once again, and then we need to build trust in that, is that in games of chance, and pay attention to the guy with the tie in the middle, moods can shift very, very, very quickly. And Willem asked me, what kind of mood shifts do you expect from our current government? Frankly, not a lot, but I see some silver lining in the long term. And let's discuss a little bit about that. Because why is it not moving? Why is it only getting worse? Competing realities within government. I think that's one of the most important parts. We have a Ministry of Justice, we have a Ministry of Finance. Let's take two topics. Taxation. Ministry of Finance with Heinen, he needs to clear his budget. That is his one thing. He wants stable, reasonable budget with a minority government. Why would he take up the task of gaming taxation and not tackle the large parts in his negotiations with left-wing or right-wing parties? Ministry of Justice and Gaming Authority might be willing, but they have no say at the table. Privatization, again. I think the Ministry of Finance, I'll come to that later, would like to see some steps in the direction of privatization, but Ministry of Justice, no. It's not a priority. There are risk and capacity. So even within government, when they're discussing it, they don't have one position. A second reason. What I remembered, and I'm back here again and I hear it, there are a lot of nitty-gritty debates within the sector, and a lot of which I have taken place in and I've put my attention to when I was lobbying in the sector. The differentiation between online and other operators, horizontal consistency, the differentiation between land-based and online, and go on and go on. I've called 3 MPs who are much more willing to talk to me now than when I was working in the sector before this presentation. I asked them, when you're thinking about gambling, what are you thinking about? None of these topics came up. None. They don't even know what it is. The topics that come up, I will talk about it later, is about the failure of the online legalization of gambling. That is the narrative currently in The Hague. Only when that failure has been dealt with, there might be room for a new narrative and room to reclaim the market. And if they're interested in the topic, when I talk to them, they say more restriction, more protection. More enforcement is more protection. Less marketing is more protection. Less operators means more protection. And sometimes when they show their liberal side, they will add alcohol to bingo and celebrate a win. But that's not the real discussion. We will see this debate continue in the coming weeks. It's an important month, as you all know. Fiscal debate, state-owned enterprises debate, and games of chance debate. I think you're in to brace yourselves, because we've seen Bicker, we've seen Beckerman with their initiative note. They will push motions and they will be accepted. And that's the true and God-honest story. But there is some room for a long-term mood shift. But it requires something from the whole industry. And it helps when you're a little bit away that you see that it's not dominating the narrative in The Hague, but you also can zoom out and think, what was I thinking about when I was in the industry? And I think mood swing one is that government will most likely research privatization once again. That will take time, but they're going to research it and see what's happening there. Mood swing two, and I think this is more important, I think there's momentum to address taxation in the real sense. I've heard some noises that something could happen, -1%, -2%. A readjustment, they call it. An optimization of the taxation rate. Not back to 34.8, no, never. But maybe a readjustment or optimization. But it also asks something of you. And this is something I often talk about, the spiral case of the gambling industry. Are we pulling each other back in this industry to the bottom every time? Bottom, because you have more than me, I pull you down, and we end in the basement? Or are we pulling each other up and get a sturdy foundation going up? And the challenge, in my view, is not only reclaim the market, Willem, but also reframe the market. And people who know me, I'm not only going to bash this market in this industry today, but I try to come up with some ways forward. And I think the key message is that the regulated market is the only place where protection can be continuously improved, measured, and enforced. And the industry is there to maximize the share of the protected participation. I've heard all the words again today. Channelization, the word that should be forbidden by law by today. It is the word that is not being listened to by politicians. It's defensive, and I urge you to stop using that word. So use different words, but also use different behavior. And I think there are 3 things I've written down, and there are much more. Are we talking about illegal offerings and illegal markets? No, you should talk about consumers outside of the protected system, because it's about consumers. Politicians are talking about consumers. They're not talking about markets. When I hear 50 cents to every dollar, I hear more money, money, money. A money-driven industry. It's about consumers. Let's talk about consumers outside the protected system. Let's talk about protected versus unprotected gambling. And channelization? No, about the protected participation rate. Reframe it. Reframe this market. And that's what politicians might listen to. Because if you go to marketing and the ban that's coming for online gaming, you could reframe it to a legitimate policy question. The legitimate policy question being, where's the point at which consumers can no longer distinguish regulated from unregulated operators? There are 2 aspects to marketing. Recruitment of new players, which politicians won't listen to, or navigation. And the key is about navigation, of getting customers to the legal offering. Second, taxation, sustainable public revenue. When the legal market or the unprotected market shrinks, also your tax basis will erode. And those are more legitimate policy questions. It sounds like a consultant putting some words on the table, but these discussions matter. And also the MPs and the policy people I've spoken to off the record, on the background, say it's needed that we have discussions like that. And there's a little bit of willingness somewhere in the midst. And I think if this group together works together, that could work. Because, to be frank, I'm preaching to acquire, and everybody today has been preaching to acquire. Because there's no MPs here, the Ministry of Justice is absent, the Ministry of Finance is absent. And I think one great goal would be, Willem, and I'm offering all my help free of charge to you for next year, is to have one MP here next year, to have the Ministry of Justice back here, and have the Ministry of Finance back here, because that's also reclaiming the market. Thank you.
Offer accepted, Robin. Let's do that for next year. I think we have one question from the audience, and thank you for your refreshing perspectives. Robin, it's in front of you. You're talking about changing the conversation, but who, and you mentioned it briefly, would be listening? Which parties or policymakers could be susceptible to this support?
I think we have, on the right-wing side, you have parties who are willing to talk. So that's the easy part. But I think also through the state-owned enterprises, you have on the left-wing side, also with your unions, you could have some access, still have some access. And you have some new liberal policymakers, also on the left-wing side, that could be susceptible to this approach. But also, maybe you should host a more neutral table. A neutral table, round table, where you have operators, healthcare, and maybe ministry, in a setting where they feel comfortable. I heard something, a rumor that it might going to happen next week or something, but that could also be a thing that could help creating this conversation. But it's also just sending your stuff, because the thing is, politicians will read your position paper. Most of the time, will read your emails, but it has to be in things they can use, the arguments.
No, that was clear from your presentation. Robin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Willem.
Thank you.